Hey there guys, and welcome to session 20. We have hit the big 2-0. This is nominally 40 hours into development, which, one of those things when you look at times like this and notice that I keep on going over, technically, obviously, it's a bit over 40 hours, but, who's counting really? Who's counting? So, I wanted this session to be a big session, that we accomplish a whole bunch, and unfortunately, due to board decisions made about 2 sessions ago, this is not going to be that. This is honestly, unfortunately, not much on the demo front has been completed. Instead, because I made that decision about 2 sessions ago to do combat in the map demo, like actual in-game combat, we are in a situation where I have to start getting things ready for actual production, and therefore this session, both hours, was me changing things around and getting them adjusted to make them work better with the actual gameplay, as opposed to just getting them to a functioning state for demo purposes. So that's what we got today. Again, not as interesting as I had hoped for, but on the bright side, this is all stuff that we're going to need. So the first hour right here was getting weapons switched over to using timers. That's something that has been on the to-do list for a while now, and that's what we did. So you can see here at the very top, we got rid of all the weapon states because we no longer need weapon states because we have timers instead. And I guess I should send you over to Visual Studio Code, shouldn't I? Because that's easier for you to look at, generally speaking. So now that you are over there, let's continue downwards. You'll see that, gotta get you over to items.js. So you'll see that stackable, here we are. I put in this whole entire section right here in the description of weapon. I put it in weapon specifically instead of weapon type because weapon is where the timers actually used. So you can see timers here. This note actually is defunct because, as I explained here, I had this revelation. So this much was not here at the end of hour 1. At the end of hour 1, I just had this written down for charging weapons and this process written up in general for any weapon. And then I made a kind of an, I don't know if I'll call it an epitome. I don't know that's that highbrow, but I got what I believe is a good idea. I believe good. Very, very good. Captain redundancy, redundant. All right. So I got an idea that instead of having charging weapons and non-charging weapons, if we use the charge state as an animation timer, that actually solves our problem with having to sync animations up to damages. So everything, all weapons will have an charge up and a cooldown timer. The cooldown timer obviously only happens after the weapon's been fired. The charge up, however, will happen for both weapons that, in theory, quote unquote, attack immediately, and those that actually have a charge up period before they can fire. So by doing this, we can now animate, for example, in the demo, the axe swing. The axe swing is the warm-up timer. So if it takes half a second for that animation to occur, I put half a second, which we can go ahead and see that over here in items.json. Up to weapons. There you go. So half a second of warm-up because that's the animation time. For the kinetic rifle, that is still at a warm-up of 1. Now, fact of the matter is that with the kinetic rifle, if it was a beam rifle, as I discussed last session, I would expect the beam rifle to have just a charge up and then a 0 animation, a 0 second animation, I should say. So the damage occurs immediately. We may have, or not we will definitely have an animation on the screen for a moment, but that animation will occur at the same time as the damage being dealt, because it is a beam weapon. It travels at the speed of light. Now, that being said, where I was going with that, with the projectile weapon. As you can see down here on this, obviously I have this note from forever ago to add ammunition type weapons, but for projectile type weapons, I'm considering actually how that would work is we'd have the cooldown timer and the warm-up timer on the weapon itself. The warm-up timer can just be anything, frankly, for the projectile type weapons. For example, if it's some kind of big rail gun, it might actually have a warm-up. If it's the kinetic rifle, it may not have a warm-up. It may have like a 0.25 warm-up or something like that, or even a 0.0 second warm-up. However, the point being is that then we create a new item when it fires that has its own animation. So its own, it is a new weapon. It has a warm-up timer of its own. We sync the warm-up timer to the animation, and once it goes across the screen, you know, assuming it's a bullet, let's say, then when it impacts, when the warm-up timer is done, we deal damage with it, and then we just chuck the projectile weapon, the projectile object, I should say. So that's how I'm considering doing projectile weapons from in the future. I don't think I'm going to implement that just yet, but that would allow us to have effectively 3 states: the warm-up, the projectile itself, and the cooldown afterwards. And that does that, that achieves that without having to add any more complexity to the weapon class itself. So, furthermore, that also gives us a tip-off on how to animate, because right now we have 2 animations. I'll go ahead and hop over to that really quick. We did add a new GUI script in here, and right now we have 2 animations that are going to be implemented, which is swing and charge, so melee weapon and a weapon that charges up. This obviously, if it's a projectile weapon as opposed to an actual charging weapon, so again, the difference between a beam weapon or a railgun, a beam weapon / railgun and a kinetic rifle. The kinetic rifle may not have an actual charging animation, it may just have a projectile animation. Well, that helps us out here, because then we don't have to worry about this animate charge, we can do something else. That animate charge could actually be another function altogether. Instead of animate charge is what I mean to say. Wow, I am all over the place tonight. I don't know if it's just the coffee or what, but instead of the animate charge, we can have an animate projectile if we check event.weapon.weapon type and find out that the weapon type is a projectile weapon. So in that case, we just add one more check down here and we animate projectile instead of animate charge. Again, the difficulty if we do not do it this way is then we've got to figure out, because right now I'm just going off range. Well, either we got to add another range to this, or we can just add a different weapon type, and we can check the weapon type first, and then after we're done checking the weapon type, we can check range to decide whether to swing or charge. So that is the deal with that. Otherwise, we implemented timers. I implemented in timers, and this is something I had talked about when we first implemented timers, an auto freeze property. So timers, I think, are down here. Timer, so auto freeze. So this was something I talked about again when we first implemented it. I wanted to get timers done really quick, as I recall. I didn't want to spend a whole bunch of time, you know, adding other features. I just wanted them done and working. So now we have the auto freeze, and what the auto freeze does is when we update cycles down here, if we did update a cycle and set the collect flag, if this has auto freeze, then it just freezes it now. This now obviously doesn't necessarily, because of preserve, get set. So one of those things. The preserve keyword doesn't actually get called here. However, we could, I included it in this call because we could, in theory, make another adjustment to include, for example, auto preserve. which would modify this to say, you know, if preserve is undefined, preserved equals this dot preserve, auto preserve, and then we can go ahead and either preserve it or not. So that's why I included now in this call, even though by default right now, this dot frozen will not get set to it. It will be set by default to -1, which is non-preserving. So with that being said, let's see. Let me check the GitHub really quick to see if there was anything else I missed while we're over in utils before going back. Oh, okay, yes. First off, there are actually a few. I added a set ready, so this forces the collect flag on. It does not modify cycles at all. It just forces the collect flag on, which is useful. And then cycle elapsed rather, which was down here. And I see, it made sense when I wrote this, but because I just misspoke right now, I maybe shouldn't change the name of this. So this is how much of a cycle has elapsed. This is so for example, if the cycle takes 1 second and we've been 30 milliseconds into it, it will return 30 milliseconds is the point here. So that is useful for animating or updating the animations on screen for example, the cooldown. Now, technically speaking, the cooldown, we can just check this dot cooldown and animate it on the assumption that nothing's going wrong, right? So on screen, when we animate the cooldown of a weapon, we just check what the weapon's cooldown is supposed to be and just animate it to that and assume that we're going to be in sync. There's no reason why it really shouldn't be. So it's not necessarily going to be useful for that, but it could be used as a check in that situation, which is why I bring it up. And let's see. Yep, that is it for util. So let's hop back to items.js. So now that we have all the timers in here, now that we have timers implemented, now we can go ahead and change the is available, is fireable, and is charging. Actually, was in charging. Yes, okay, is charging was a function that we had before. I had to double check that. And obviously this just gets updated to take into account the cooldown and warm up timers. One thing I should note, I glossed over this very, very quickly at the beginning, but you can determine where the weapon is at in its fire cycle based on what the two timers are doing. So if it's on cooldown, then the cooldown will be not ready. The warm-up will be frozen, and it will not be ready because we clear the warm-up flag once we fire. So because we clear the warm-up flag once we fire, excuse me, then that will not be ready. It will be frozen because it's not running until it starts charging up, until it starts the warm-up process, and obviously this dot cooldown will not be ready because we're currently cycling through a cooldown. After we are off cooldown, you can see this dot warmup is frozen and not ready. So this is just ready. Instead of pre-charging, I could call this ready to charge. That would be the other way to write this. This is the in-between state. So we are not on cooldown or idle. Actually, idle is another way to say. Is another way to refer to this state. And honestly, idle might be a better term for it. So anyway, the cooldown is ready because we're not waiting for the cooldown. The warm-up is not currently active and not ready. And then charging, obviously, nothing has changed with cooldown. We're not on cooldown yet. The warm-up is no longer frozen because it is now cycling. However, we're not ready yet because we're not ready to fire. And fully charged / fireable is, as you would expect, the cooldown is ready and it goes back to frozen, however, because it's an auto freeze. So the second the warm-up is ready, we know for a fact that it's ready to be fired because as soon as it's fired, this it would be cleared and frozen, and therefore we know that it's no longer fireable, obviously. And then just to outline that more specifically, I have this note right here but I'm pretty sure I explained everything just then, no problem. So with that in mind, that is these 3 states right here, just checking these variables right here basically. And then fire, we check if it's fireable, if not, return. And after we fire, again, we got to make sure cooldown is ready. So I just, as a precaution, clear ready, because if for some reason ready was already set, or actually no, I take that back, ready will be set. So yeah, we need to clear ready because we are no longer off cooldown. And then we need to unfreeze it so it starts counting. As simple as that. Warm up, clear, warm up, as we've stated before, needs to have its ready flag cleared, and it will already be frozen because of auto freeze. This right here, update timers, is just very simple update cycles. Needs to be in there in order for it to actually work. I broke combat because I forgot this had to happen. So basically I opened up combat, nothing was happening at all, and I went, that's really odd, why is nothing happening? And that's because, again, with timers we need to update the cycles in order for them to change states. And then clear state is obviously just clearing both states on both of the cooldowns. And this is where the set ready comes in, because we don't want to start combat, for example, with the weapon on cooldown. So that is that. Very simple, very straightforward. Don't really need to explain too much more about that. And let's consult das GitHub. Yeah, there was actually a lot. This got simplified down a lot because we're using timers now. For example, the whole entire update state function, which actually used to be, so basically where this update timers was, there was an update state, which would basically check everything and check timers and whatnot, and set the weapon states, which all just got thrown out the window and made my life so much easier with the timers. But nope, that looks like that's all for items.js. And let's see. So it gets a little tricky over in map demo for me to point out what exactly changed due to these changes in the first hour. I don't think it was much. Over in combat, yeah, actually, over in combat, should scripts combat, prepare combat. Okay, prepare combat was completely new. So yeah, as part of this update for the timers, over in combat, this is combat GUI. We actually want combat the script, combat scripts. Here we go. I added prepare combat, and this makes sure that all weapons are cool, are the way they should be. So for each weapon in player's weapons and enemy weapons, we reset the cooldown, reset cooldown, freeze it, and set ready, because obviously, again, as I stated before, weapon should enter combat as already ready. And then same thing with the warm-up, but we clear ready, make sure that it is not set, because the warm-up, it should not be charging when you start combat. You gotta actually tell it to charge. So that was added in. I found that I did a error in here, a typo. This all the way, and it's one of those things that the IDE helped me get this error. Originally, I had it defined like this, with an extra E between the M and the Y. And the IDE did me a major favor and let me keep on making that mistake, that typo, all throughout the code. So that got fixed. And down here, instead of update states, which we were calling before, actually, no, we were not calling that. I guess that was happening as part of... Huh, that's interesting. We should have been updating states. I'm not seeing it on the changelog, though, where that was happening. But regardless, now we call update weapons, which update weapons over here on character. Well, let me just hit it over here. That was added to the character, to the combat character. And that just updates timers on all weapons. And update timers again does the update cycle on the timers. So that is that. There we go. Undo my edits really quick. And so that was, oh, the one other change I did in the first hour before we move on to second hour changes was I moved the AI down. So the AI just used to be inside the combat loop. I decided A, it's better to have it separated, and B, this is useful if in case we decide to change the AI in the future, which is unlikely to happen, but just in case it's there. In the second hour, I believe we are on to the second hour. Let me just quick check that. Oh, actually, no, we're not. Over in combat demo obviously broke because we changed the weapon types, or how the weapons function. So we updated some things. This is 230, line 230. Control Z 230, or Control G rather, 230. So down here we used to be checking weapon states. We are no longer checking weapon states. We are now checking timers. And down here we had to call prepare combat. So we added in prepare combat to make sure we are ready. And that, I believe, should be more or less everything from the first hour. There might be another minor change somewhere, but that is probably it, I think. Oh, there was also, never mind, there was one more from the first hour, which was, remember when I made the change over here? This was broken. We quote unquote fixed it, and then I realized that we didn't fix it when I tried to run the combat demo. So the thing that was not fixed is that this line originally was char equals activator, CHAR, and obviously it's still broken. That's hilarious. So what was supposed to happen here is this, and I for some reason screwed it up, but it was still working in the combat demo, so everybody laugh. There we go. That's how I was supposed to change it, and for some reason I changed it to the opposite, which is hilarious. So that is now fixed again. Great, good job. That is refixed. It was working, like I said, in the combat demo, only because the combat demo only works one way, but it is what it is. And now we are on to hour 2. So hour 1 was getting everything fixed for the timers, basically. That was basically everything there. And hour 2 was, first off, implementing that great idea of items.js, having everything be so adding this note and then getting rid of all the places where I had originally this .warmup if weapon type .warmup. This here, let me just type it out rather than say it. So this was originally this .warmup equals this .weapon type .warmup question mark new utils .timer etc or none. So this is how I had it originally, and in the first hour that's how everything got typed up. I had to come back and undo my changes, or not undo, but modify all the changes I made, which referenced a none, or a null rather, more precisely, because we're in JavaScript. So I had to update all the code that I had down here that handled the case in which a weapon did not have a warm-up timer, which again was not a change I made until the second hour when I added this note and said, okay, you know what, everything has a charge timer. So that was the first thing I modified up in the second hour. And moving on from there, I believe I went back to the demo. I'm pretty sure that's the last thing I did outside of demo. Oh, I guess technically speaking, back here, I mentioned this. I already showed you this already, but this technically was the second hour, changing the warm up on the axe to have animation time. But everything else ends up being the next major change, which is preparing the code to work in the future. So I had to start I was thinking I was going to animate stuff, and at this point I'm questioning whether or not I will animate stuff in the map demo because I really just want it done. However, as part of getting stuff ready to animate, I decided to create this file right here, which is GUI/combat.js. And basically I decided that the GUI that we have on screen in the map demo is probably exactly what we're going to end up using in game, and therefore it's silly to have all these functions just inside the map demo. If they're going to be exactly like what we have in the game, then it makes more sense to move them onto their own file at this point. And that's something I had talked about in previous code reviews, where I said, look, a lot of, once we get done the demos and prove that everything works, have our proof of concepts, a lot of it is going to be copying, pasting over. Well, I decided that it was finally time to start acting like that's how that was actually going to work. So a lot of the changes in hour 2 was cutting stuff out of map demo, moving it to combat.js and GUI, and modifying the code to work correctly. So, and honestly, to be fair, I'm not even done all the modifications, so therefore I haven't even checked that everything is working correctly. I checked some things. I did fire it up and make sure that started working on errors at any rate. I haven't worked all the way through any error. I can't say I've gone through all the errors yet. However, I started making sure that at the very least on boot up it's not throwing errors. I have not actually started a combat yet to make sure yet. But basically, first off, I did a type def here just because that makes my life easier inside of this file to always know what a weapon event is. This weapon event is basically right off of combat.js, the actual module, the scripts module, and that is this guy right here. So it's the default event data, and then the extra event data that we provide in the handle weapon function. So that is now one of those things documented over on combat.js-GUI. I mean, it's one of those things. I keep on saying it the other way around. So GUI/combat.js. And then we have uniform functions in here to add combat character actions. One of those things, just mostly a ease of use implementation. I moved the handle combat. So previously this was handle combat key press. Handle combat hotkey, I think is what it was called over in the demo. I changed it to key press, and instead of getting the key, which is what we were passing it previously, we're just going to pass it the whole event. That way it can be plugged into anywhere. Again, future proofing was the point here. Cut this out. Just straight up cut this out of the combat.demo and added the on clicks for the buttons. I wanted to get further, but I did not, unfortunately. So unfortunately, this is the only thing that's been updated in the stat block. Again, I wanted to add more stuff to it, but ran out of time. Heck, ran over time. So I think you understand. Down here in load combat, I figured this load combat function that we had in the demo was probably going to be exactly what we needed for everything else. The only difference being is the finish combat callback. I figured that probably is different, but everything else in here, all these event listeners rather, these were all going to be exactly the same no matter where we were starting combat at, because again, the GUI is going to be exactly the same no matter what. So as you can see here, I added in some update input, which is not actually defined yet. I still got to define that one. Again, something I ran out of time doing. Otherwise, combat update HP is going to work exactly like it was before because it copy pasted out. And then we have added in here the animated attacks, which I had shown you back at the beginning. I did have to, obviously, for each of these functions, actually get a new reference to the combat box because we no longer have combat box in the global scope like we did over here in map demo. So that had to be added in. Start combat, again, cutting, pasted over. There is nothing else that needs to happen here, so we are good. And already talked about that one and that one. All right, so yeah, that is everything in GUI so far. So we will continue to add to this combat GUI. Again, this will be what's used in the main game. So what you see in the combat or in the map demo will be identical for combat purposes to what we'll see in the game. Aside from, as I stated before, I don't think I will actually fill out the animations yet. I think I will go ahead and leave that on the side because I do want to get the demo done so we can move on to actual production. But aside from that, everything else should be exactly as it appears in game. So back over to map demos because that is the last place we need to check for updates. And let me go ahead and check the GitHub. Okay, so yes, I went ahead and put combat GUI in here. That way we can reference back to the combat GUI functions, which we need to do. So all the way down here in handle key presses, we are now, instead of calling handle combat key, instead of handle combat key press, we are calling combat GUI handle key press. And it actually should be getting the event instead. I did not change that yet, which was a mistake. There we go. We cut out a whole entire section down here. Down here in finish, where are we at? Yeah, so the port event obviously goes to combat GUI load to combat. Down here in the finish combat, which is, there it is. So this is our finish combat function, and it looks like it is too far over. There we go. So previously we did not have this. I added this in. So just like in the game over state, we're going to remove all listeners and set combat to none. And 274, 270. Oh no, actually this is now 180. 180. So down here we had just load combat, right? And it just said combat. Obviously now we need to pass it our finish combat function so it knows where to go and change the reference just like everything else. And boom. There's one more change it says here. I guess I just deleted some white space down the bottom. So yeah. All right, so that is all the changes then. That happened. Again, probably feels a little bit underwhelming because it's all background code and there's nothing really to look at. But at least it's done and we can continue moving forward with actually getting this demo running. So that is basically the stream over, I guess. The update over at any rate. 40 hours into the development. Again, plus or minus. Not really minus, just plus. Am I where I think I wanted to be? No, I am not. Again, I wanted to be done the demos and moving on to the actual game itself. That's where I wanted to be. Do I think that I am behind schedule? Probably not, just because a lot of stuff that has taken up time in this first 20 hours, or first 40 hours, first 20 sessions, has been stuff that is going to contribute directly to the gameplay. So I do think that the next 40 hours, again, because I said it could take up to 80 hours, it was my guess. So up to session 40, I don't know that that will take as long as it would. So for example, what I'm trying to get at here is we probably won't hit 40 sessions. I hope we don't hit 40 sessions, because then I'll feel real happy about that. So if we get done in, let's say, 30 to 35 sessions, then I think that will be pretty much proof that everything progressed a lot more quickly in the second half, quote unquote second half, than previously anticipated. We got a lot done with the demos, in other words, that laid the groundwork for getting the game done. So yeah, I'm not feeling too bad about where we're at. However, I would have liked, like I said, to have a much more interesting update this time, just as the commemorative milestone. Otherwise, I will say that it is pretty interesting, the changes we've had to make as we go along. So for example, major changes we made, implementing widespread event listeners across all the, not all, but most of the objects. That was not originally intended, but that was a major change in design philosophy that we implemented. Adding timers was another major change. Obviously, as you saw in this session, we had to go through and redo the weapons in order to get them up to date with timers, which streamlined the code, seriously streamlined the code. And one of those things, had we done that from the beginning, we'd probably be further, well, not probably, we almost certainly would be further along in development right now, but we didn't. So one of those things. And then the change in how weapons function in this session is the I don't know if it's the last of the major changes. I'll see if, while I'm talking here, if I can't think of another major change, but that was a serious major change, and honestly I like that a lot better than what we were doing before with the weapon states. So it was a good change, I think. I'm pretty sure. If it breaks later on and I decide that it was a terrible change, then I'm sorry, future me. But right now it's looking like a good change to the architecture of how the game functions. Let's see, any other major changes to gameplay, or at least to how the game was intended to be designed. I'm not thinking of any off the top of my head, so I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that those were the top 3 major design changes so far in the first 20 sessions. So that is all well and good. Again, it is a better game because of all those things that happened. A better product, whatever you want to call it. And I think that is it from me. I can't think of anything else I wanted to say aside from thank you all who have been following along. It's much appreciated. Hope that this has been an entertaining journey so far, and I look forward to hopefully finishing this game ahead of schedule. That is the goal. One of those things, you set the schedule and then you do your best to get it done beforehand. Not that that always happens, but you know, the goal is to get it done ahead of schedule, to under promise and over deliver, as they say. So look forward to that, guys. Thank you for the continued support, as I said. And yep, that is it from me. As always, thank you for watching if you have been, and I hope you have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at in the world. And I will catch you next time.